Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my review of the Sigma 10-18mm f2.8 DCDN, an ultra-wide-angle zoom designed for APS-C mirrorless cameras. Announced in October 2023 and costing around $600 or pounds, it's available in Fujifilm X, Sony E and Leica L mounts, and while it is designed for APS-C sensors, it will also work on full-frame Sony and Leica L mount bodies in a cropped mode, albeit with your body operating at a reduced resolution for photos. Now, there's plenty of wide zooms for the X and E mounts, but arguably the closest rival for the new Sigma is Tamron's 11-20mm f2.8, launched about 6 months earlier, and also available in Fujifilm and Sony mounts for around $700 to $800 or pounds, so already the Sigma is a little bit more affordable. For this review, I tested a pre-production Sigma 10-18mm on my Sony a6400. The 1.5 times field reduction of most APS-C sensors means the coverage is going to be equivalent to 15 to 27mm in full-frame terms, and you're seeing that in practice here, delivering a classic ultra-wide to standard wide range. Meanwhile, the bright f2.8 aperture allows you to keep sensitivities nice and low and achieve mild background blur if you can get close enough to your subject. The 10-18 is a member of Sigma's more affordable contemporary series. It measures 72 by 64mm and weighs 255 grams. This makes it roughly the same diameter as Tamron's 11-22.8, but 22mm shorter and around 2/3 the weight. Now, the Tamron isn't exactly large or heavy, but the Sigma is noticeably more compact. The design and controls are very simple, with just 2 rings and no switches. Closest to the lens mount is a smooth and free-spinning manual focusing ring, although with the ridges flush to the barrel on either side, I didn't personally find it the most comfortable to use. Towards the end of the barrel is the zoom ring, with the lens physically at its shortest when set to the 18mm focal length. As you adjust the zoom wider towards the 10mm focal length, the whole end of the barrel extends by about a centimetre. It's a smooth mechanism with quite a short throw, which also doesn't rotate the 67mm filter thread. Sigma supplies a petal hood that pushes onto the end of the barrel. It stays in place securely without the usual bayonet twist and lock, but I'm not sure it's that much of a time saver. In terms of dust and moisture resistance, there is a rubber grommet at the mount end, but I believe that's where the sealing ends, so be warned under wet conditions. To measure the image quality at a typical landscape distance, I photographed Brighton Pier with the Sigma 10-18 starting here at 10mm for an ultra-wide 15mm equivalent field of view, and with the aperture wide open to 2.8. Again, I used my Sony a6400 for the tests in this review, with distortion compensation set to auto, as this is how the lens is designed to be used, and as always I've angled the view here so that details run into the corners. Taking a closer look at the middle with the aperture wide open at f2.8, the Sigma lens is looking pretty good, although if you can close it down by a stop or two, you'll gain a little extra crispness. Returning to f2.8 before then heading out into the corners, and you'll see the details becoming softer in the extremes, but it's not too bad unless you're really pixel peeping. As you close down the aperture, the details become better defined, and for the best performance across the frame, I'd try to use around f5.6 to f8. Next for the lens midway through its focal range at 14mm, again wide open at f2.8. Taking a closer look in the centre of the frame tells pretty much the same story as at 10mm. There's plenty of detail, but you can enjoy a slight boost in crispness if you can close the aperture down by a stop or two. Now let's open the aperture again to f2.8 before moving into the corners, where you'll again see softness in the extremes. As before, this improves as you close down the aperture, and again by f8 it's looking pretty good from corner to corner. And finally, for this distant quality test, the lens set to its longest focal length of 18mm, and again with the aperture wide open at f2.8. Taking a closer look in the middle shows the lens performing well right out of the gate with crisp details and little benefit to closing it down. With the aperture open to f2.8 again and heading into the corners, there's some softening, but less than before, and only in the very extremes. Close the aperture even just one stop to f4 and the corners at 18mm become much improved, although again at f5.6 to 8 they can become even crisper. So for this particular sample, the Sigma lens performed better at its long end. Moving on to people, ultra-wide zooms may not be your first choice for portraits, but they can be useful for environmental compositions where you see more of the surroundings, or of course group shots, especially when you can't step back any further. They're also ideal for vlogging or presenting pieces to camera at close range, especially if you can keep your face towards the middle of the frame to minimise distortion. This can work particularly well for product presentation style videos, with the close focusing distance allowing you to fill the frame with many subjects, even with the lens fully zoomed out to 10mm. Sadly, like the Tamron 11-20, the Sigma 10-18 doesn't have any optical stabilization of its own, so for handheld filming you'll be relying on IBIS or digital compensation built into your camera, or of course using something like a gimbal. My own Sony a6400 has no built-in stabilization, nor support for post-processing and catalyst, so you're looking at a totally unstabilized clip here. Sorry for the wobbles. And finally, to see the potential for bokeh blobs, I photographed this ornament with the lens zoomed to 18mm and positioned close to the minimum focusing distance of 19cm. I'll now go through the aperture range starting at f2.8. Note if you set the lens to the wide end of 10mm, you can focus even closer to about 11.5cm away. These respective distances and the resulting reproduction is roughly similar to the Tamron. I've got some more examples at the closest distances in just a moment. So now it's time for my final verdict with a selection of sample images for you. The Sigma 10-18mm f2.8 DCDN is another very welcome lens for APS-C systems, and I'm delighted that in Sigma's world that now means not just Sony and Leica L mounts, but also Fujifilm X mount versions from day one. It's compact, light and affordable, and capable of dramatic results with ultra-wide coverage and a bright aperture that'll keep sensitivities nice and low, while also allowing for some background blur, at least with fairly close subjects. This makes it ideal not just for expansive landscapes and interiors, but also for presenting pieces to camera. On the downside, don't expect miracles with the aperture wide open. The image is sharp in the middle at f2.8 and across the focal range, but inevitably there's some softening as you approach the far corners, especially at the wider end of the range. Sharpness in the corners certainly improves as you close down the aperture, but if you want pin-sharp corners at f2.8, you're going to need to spend more on a model that's also likely to be heavier. Of course, if your subject is towards the middle of the frame, then you're unlikely to notice, and this makes it especially suitable for vloggers, although the absence of optical stabilization means that you're going to need a body with IBIS, or digital compensation, or simply mount it on a tripod or a gimbal. Fujifilm owners should compare it against the XF 10-24 f4, which is a stop slower, larger, and more expensive too, but zooms a little further and includes optical stabilization. Meanwhile, Sony owners should weigh up the 10-20 f4PZ, again a stop slower and still lacking optical stabilization, but a little smaller, lighter, and featuring a powered zoom. And if you're solely or mostly intending to vlog, I'd also consider Sony's 11mm f1.8 at a similar price to the Sigma lens. This, as a fixed model, trades the zoom for a brighter aperture and potentially better compatibility with the alpha steady shot modes. As I mentioned at the start, the closest rival remains Tamron's 11-20, sharing a similar focal range, the same f2.8 aperture, and availability for both Sony and Fujifilm mounts. The Sigma lens slightly undercuts the Tamron on cost, not to mention length and weight, but in early tests doesn't quite match its sharpness. I'd like to make a more formal comparison, but it's great to have so many decent options to choose from. And that's it for this review. Let me know what you think in the comments. Check out my review page at cameralabs.com if you want to access my sample images, and thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.